I guess the idea is that if the US provides anti-personnel landmines to the Ukrainians, that they will be able to do the same thing and use those mines to halt the advance of Russians.
Escalation in the war in Ukraine. Putin threatens nuclear weapons. The American embassy is closed after what is described as a specific threat. There's a lot going on. In another attempt to shore up Ukraine, Joe Biden has approved the supply of anti-personnel landmines in Ukraine. An anonymous US official has said they'll be delivered soon and will be used in Ukraine's territory. Let's speak to Christina, who's a chief foreign correspondent for the Sunday Times, and she has reported from Ukraine. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What does all of this mean together, do you think?
I think this is a recognition that Ukraine is not in a good place militarily. I was there a few weeks ago, and the Russians have taken advantage, really, of the fact that Ukraine moved a lot of its troops into Russia to take that territory in August in Western Russia, which at the time was kind of seen as a morale-boosting exercise and perhaps a clever strategy, but in a way, Putin called Zelensky's bluff by not taking his troops away from eastern Ukraine and taking advantage of the absence of the Ukrainian troops. And we've literally seen the last few months, the Russians take more territory in eastern Ukraine than they've taken over the last year. I mean, this is still quite small amounts, but it is significant. So I think it's a recognition that Ukraine is not in a good place, but also to try and get them into as good a place as possible before President Trump takes over in January. So these are quite big changes in terms of what the US is now providing.
And do you think, I mean, many people were saying exactly that, we need to get, Ukraine into a good position before Donald Trump takes over. However, all the kind of moving parts, the stuff that's been happening in the last couple of days, and especially overnight with the embassy situation, the anti-personnel landmines, the long-range missiles. Could that actually get us to a more dangerous place than we would hope to be?
Well, these are things, of course, that Zelensky has been asking for a long time, and his frustration is that all these things are coming too late. Yeah. They used already yesterday the long-range missiles, the ATACMS missiles, is pretty much as soon as they were given permission to strike into Russian territory. The landmines, I have to say, I'm a bit surprised. I have done stories on the landmines in Ukraine. The Russians have been using them liberally. There's about 2 million landmines, people think, in Ukraine. They've used them very cleverly as defenses to stop the Ukrainians taking back territory that they've taken. Obviously, I guess the idea is that if the US provides anti-personnel landmines to the Ukrainians, that they will be able to do the same thing and use those mines to halt the advance of Russians. But as you know, I mean, I think 164 countries signed a ban on use of anti-personnel mines in 1997. People might remember Princess Diana going to Angola and using that as a way to explain to people the dangers of landmines. So now the US didn't sign that treaty, nor did Russia, but we haven't seen the significant use of landmines in the last 30 years until now. So, I think this would be quite a worrying move to a lot of people, seeing the US now providing them. Of course, they have said that they providing, I think they're calling them non-persistent landmines that only have a certain lifespan and become inert. But even so, I mean, I've reported a lot on the kind of injuries that landmines cause. Many Ukrainians have seen their limbs amputated because of landmines. Even I've met people who've had all their legs, both legs and both arms blown off. I mean, just horrendous injuries.
Yes. Christina, thank you very much for talking to us, putting some perspective around all of this. That's Christina Lamb, who's the chief foreign correspondent for the Sunday Times.
One of the things we've been talking about is this spectre of World War III that Christina's just talking about, various manifestations of. Putin raises nuclear stakes is in the front of the Times today, World War III in the Times today, for all the analysis on it. This question of is it actually a weapon by Vladimir Putin to make us think of things like World War III as a way of stopping us doing what we should have done a year ago, giving more weapons to the Ukraine so Ukrainians can, if not win the war, at least get to a point where they can negotiate from a position of strength. Ken says, I remember sitting in the library at school watching the school clock approaching 4 p.m. on the day when the Russian ships carrying nuclear missiles would meet the waiting American fleet, which was ready to sink them, and thinking the world was about to end. Fortunately, Khrushchev and JFK agreed to step down. Does it feel like that? And people who lived in the 70s and 80s will know that the idea of the bomb was a much bigger part of our life. We've been hearing today that the nuclear threat from Russia is just not really there. It's something that they use to try and delay and deter us. But is it on your mind? Are your kids asking you about it? Is it a spectre in the consciousness now?
There's quite a lot that's happened overnight. We've heard about the US temporarily closing its embassy in Kyiv after receiving warnings of a significant Russian air attack. And Joe Biden is going to give anti-personnel landmines to Ukraine. Those mines were banned by the UK and over 100 other countries in 1997. You will remember, of course, Princess Diana walking through a minefield to draw attention to the way that they kill people and destroy communities. She was working with the landmine charity, the Halo Trust. Its chief executive is James Cowan. We can speak to him now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Did you think that this might happen?
I think the possibility has always been there. I think what I would focus on is the fact that Ukraine has been extremely cautious, and it's only now that it's requested these systems. And secondly, the United States, although it's not a signatory of the landmine ban treaty, has been extremely generous in its support for clearance. And I think we need to distinguish between the legitimate right of a country to defend itself under Article 51 of the UN Charter and post-conflict humanitarian clearance. And that's what my charity does.
Right. So you're saying, I mean, you don't obviously no one, it's hard, isn't it, when we're talking about a war, conflict between two people, between two countries, but you're saying that the context here means, the self-defense context means that it is acceptable for anti-personnel landmines to be used.
I'm not going to use that term because I run a humanitarian organisation and I desperately worry about the consequences of landmines on innocent civilians. But I think what's encouraging in this context is that the United States is deploying much more advanced landmines that can self-destruct. The really toxic, unpleasant aspect of landmines is the fact they're dumb munitions laid in the ground to kill a soldier, but actually end up killing civilians, often children, many decades after the event. These are not that type of mine. These are much more sophisticated ones that can be time initiated and got rid of once their military needs is gone. So I think there are some encouraging aspects to this.
I see. And you say that they self-destruct. Is there a specific time limit within which that happens?
No, they can either self-destruct manually, i.e. a command can be initiated and they can be got rid of, or they can be set on a time. So either way round, that's extremely helpful. What you don't want is mines that are laid in the ground and can't be destroyed, can only be removed by organisations such as my own. So they're not those dumb munitions, they're much more advanced types.
I see. And just finally, the more advanced types, are they being increasingly used, or, I mean, not enough?
No, I'm certainly not encouraging their use. But in the circumstances in which we see ourselves, in which Ukraine is fighting for its very survival, that is the condition in which this deployment is happening.
Okay.
So at least there is some comfort to be drawn from the fact that they're not going to lie there in the ground for many, many decades after the event.
Yes, injuring civilians. James, thank you very much. That is James Cowan. He is the chief executive of the Halo Trust.